No Hayalina. Yeah, in case you're wondering what that means, No Hayalina is just Ukrainian for happy birthday. Just keep repeating that phrase over and over again and you kind of get the gist of it. Yeah, I know. Happy birthday is kind of a repetitive song, but even in Ukrainian, it is kind of repetitive. This is like one clip that I remembered seeing ages ago and I remember existed, but it's always a bit of a shock when I have to look at that. Because I remember this. This was December 1993 and we were doing like an impromptu birthday celebration for one of my grandmothers at the time. And it's actually hard to believe, but it's almost 30 years since this thing was actually recorded. So going back and seeing some of these things, like my grandparents, some of their friends, family that were coming around to celebrate, I kind of have vivid memories of them from the time, but they've all passed on around then. And the other thing I kind of remember too was seeing this as well. Yeah, in the day and age of pre-cell phones, pre-everything being recorded digitally, this is like something that one of the neighbors around the area had decided to do. Like they bought a camcorder, thought they'd record the video. And it's kind of nice because this is actually one of the few videos of my dad in existence that I remember from the past. And it's almost hard to believe too as well. Like he passed away so long ago, I almost forgot what his voice sounded like. So it's kind of a trippy thing to see him again like that. And also kind of see how I looked like back when I was like 8 years old. And there's another part of me that's thinking that I'm looking at him in this video. I'm currently around the same age as he was at the time of this recording too. So it's very surreal to have to look back at that. So without further ado, welcome to another edition of the Wandering Ukie Cheese Café. So I had a bit of a theme going in mind for this next episode, something nostalgic, because as you've been noticing for a little while, one of the things I've been doing a lot lately on this channel is trying to retrace some family history, walking around some neighborhoods and kind of retelling stories from my past and how it kind of ties into my family, given everything that's been happening. And this one feels very topical because I feel like I want to do a little bit of a memorial for my dad since he hasn't been around for actually a long time. And given that I'm specializing in wandering around Montreal, exploring and such, I thought it would be a kind of a fun episode to kind of retrace his steps, see where he lived, share some fun stories from me growing up, and even share some stories I've learned recently from family about him too. So we got a little bit of a nostalgic trip to the past going on. There's going to be a lot of stuff to cover. There's going to be some beer talk, coffee top, not coffee top. Coffee top would be like an espresso topped with a bit of whipped milk. Yeah, that's a bad joke, so I apologize for that. But it's one that I'm kind of looking forward to doing. So I'm going to use this as an opportunity to explore the city and see where else it takes me. But before we get to that, I'm going to expect you to do one more thing. Click that subscribe button below and put your notifications on so that you know that there's going to be a video ready and it's ready for viewing. And above all else, give this thing a thumbs up because the more likes I get on here, the more these videos are promoted down the road on the channel in the recommended feeds. So you're actually helping me out a lot more than you expected. So, where do I even begin with the story? Okay, I actually had to correct myself before I was recording this. So when I was first hearing about my dad's side of the story, I originally thought he lived around the Plateau and then eventually made his way into Point St. Charles, but turns out it's actually the reverse. But considering that I need to be somewhere within the center of Montreal later this afternoon, figured I could cover the Plateau first and foremost. So I went around to Prince Arthur Street, and I actually just passed by Hotel de Ville Avenue. If that's familiar, it's probably from my wander that when I did a walk to the Plateau, get some duck confit, because I wanted to go there to try to find my other grandmother's original apartment when she first moved to Canada. But I wasn't able to find it, so I might have to check the address again when I do another episode. But I found it kind of funny, honestly, that for a guy who was basically born in Rosemont, it seemed like I have a lot more roots in the Plateau than I thought. So Prince Arthur Street East, I did a little video of that a while back when I was walking around Duluth Avenue too, but I have another point of reference for this area. I knew there's a lot of nice restaurants outside, and especially Greek restaurants. We did head one up back in like 1998. It was a place that was called Minerva, which I'm pretty sure is closed down because I don't see any trace of it anymore. Remember, it was like New Year's Day. It seemed like all the servers were half asleep because they were probably working late the night before into the New Year's Eve. But it was a nice one. Still find it funny. Saint-Leonard Boulevard, I covered it a lot on my channel because there's a lot for me to discover here. And I do a lot of walks, but I never realized until the last year when I was really starting to document my family's side of the story or my family's history that I've actually been walking through territory that's kind of in my genes. Once again, the Plateau, I didn't realize that a lot of our family started to take root around here. But I'm going to think about it a little bit more because I do have another couple of spots to hit up here. First, I'm going to need some coffee, and I know just a spot. So I had to make a stop over here because it turns out that this cafe is located close to where my dad would have been living at the time, and it's actually a pretty cozy spot. My friend introduced me to this place. It's called Nocturne Cafe. I love it too because you got the sweet owl as a logo, but ironically enough, it's not open all night as the name would imply. It's only open till 5 today, I believe, so you know, you gotta live with that. But I love the decor. It's got the old style brick like you find around the area here, and even on the shelves there's some books and even some vinyls. There's one of the Blondie records that's around over here that I kind of dig, and I thought it was kind of awesome. And yeah, I had to go get myself a usual Americano. If you've been following my channel for a while, you kind of know I dig this one. I wasn't always a coffee drinker. I think I remember the first time I tried coffee. Well, technically I tried a cafe au lait when I was 10 years old, and I thought, this tastes like shit. I can't drink this. But as time went on, I kind of got used to it. And I believe it was one of my last years in high school where I think our hot water tank at home was busted, so I couldn't take a shower to wake up in the morning. So I ended up doing a coffee as kind of a backup. And then I started drinking a bit more from time to time. Eventually, when I got into CEGEP, it was every day I had a class before 10 o'clock. And then eventually it was every school day. Then eventually it was every other day. And went from 1 coffee to 2 to, well, frankly, I'm actually at a point where I lost track how much I've been drinking. What can I say? I love my coffee. Hard to believe I found all of these photos when I was going through my mom's stuff, because these things are like at least 50, 60 years old from the area, and one I kind of knew pretty well. This one I got, well, I'll just give you a quick review. I actually have an oil painting that I kind of inherited at home that maybe one of these days I should kind of put up if I find a place in my house. Wow. But yeah, at first I thought they came to the Plateau originally, but it turns out it was Point St. Charles first. Because I was thinking to myself before, because since my grandmother on my mom's side was coming here, I thought, why is it always the Plateau? Well, back in the day, it seemed like that, I guess it was like a lot of the Ukrainians who came here. after the war had ended up around the Plateau because it was affordable and you could get some cheap rent. But as time went on, you were able to get a better job and you had a little bit more money, you were probably able to go somewhere else within the island. So I know that obviously with my mom's side, they end up around the Rosemont, and on my dad's side eventually, it was Saint-Leonard. But there's a few other reasons they went around there too. Yeah. Once again, hard to believe that all these times I've been wandering around here, I've actually been going through like family areas. In fact, there's one photo I remember seeing too that I'm gonna have to check specifically because it does ring a bell. So I'm just gonna finish this coffee and then continue the wander down. All right, cozy little spot here. And actually one thing I forgot to mention when I was sitting there was my taste in the coffee doesn't involve sugar anymore. When I first started drinking it, I was taking after what I heard my dad used to do in his. It was like 2 sugars he would always take with a little bit of milk or cream. And eventually I cut that down to 1 sugar. I tried to go back to that afterwards and I thought, wow, this is like disgustingly sweet. And then eventually I just gave up on it. Because, you know, we always have a lot of excess sugar in us in our food and cooking and whatever. Why would I need to put extra in my coffee? Good coffee, when it's done and roasted well, you don't have to worry about adding milk, sugar, cream, really. At first, I just do a little bit of milk to take some bite out of it. Anyways, I'm just walking down Prince Arthur again towards St. Urbain, and I'm getting to my next destination on my father's footsteps. Okay, I'm not sure if I'm in the right location, but I'm pretty certain I'm somewhere here. I was told that my dad was born at the Saint-Jean-d'Arcy Hospital, but I seem to be just right in front of the Hotel Dieu Hospital, which I'm not sure if it changed names recently. I'll look around to see if I can find it, but basically I want to come here because within here, my dad was born. He was on July 1st, 1954. Yep, funny thing is he was a Canada Day baby, which I thought was a kind of an interesting thing. And yeah, I think we'd benefited from that back in the day too. Remember when I was a kid, I think it was in our second, no, it was actually our third house. We got a call from one of the video stores on Canada Day where saying happy birthday and we can give you a free rental for yourself if you wanted to. But instead of getting a movie for himself, like maybe Bruce Lee movie, maybe some Chuck Norris, Star Trek, 'cause I remember that's what he enjoyed a lot. He ended up just letting us get a video game rental, which I thought was kind of nice. I'm more appreciative of things now than I was as a kid. I wasn't a good kid, maybe I could have been a bit bratty at times. So while the exact location I was given was the corner of Prince Arthur and St. Urbain, it doesn't look like I have a name that matches with Saint-Jean-d'Arcy, so I'm guessing I might have renamed it over the years. Got Hotel Dieu that was a little further north. There was the Clinical Research Center of Montreal, and then some rehabilitation center here. Well, I guess it's not too important. The important thing is I'm still walking around where my dad was born, but I'm gonna make my way to the next stop, because I knew where one of his other apartments was located. Yeah, looking at this shot, and it does look kind of familiar to me. It's mostly on the right-hand side that I see, because some of those buildings there on the roof, those still look pretty much the same. Left and the other side here, I feel like it might have been redone and reconstructed into new buildings compared to what it was, but what I was looking at on here was a photo of my dad from like 1961. So Clark Street is where they moved to around 1955. So it means that they only really lived around Point St. Charles for a year after he was born, and then moved to this area. Wow. So that means I'm just a little bit south of Prince Arthur Street and a bit north of Milton. Milton is pretty close to another microbrewery I visited from time to time called Benelux, so I know the area, just didn't expect to have that kind of relevancy. Okay, wait a minute. Yep, those buildings look very much the same. Amazing. Had to make my way back on Pine Avenue, and I'm noticing that the corner of Pine Avenue and Saint-Leonard is under construction. I was thinking to myself, like, wasn't this under construction like last year and they only recently got it done? Turns out it was just Pine Avenue, but the actual intersection, that's the part that needed to be dug up and fixed up. I guess that thing's gonna be closed for about a good 2 years at the rate that they're constructing things. Anyways, no soapbox today. I'm going to the next area within the plateau that they live. So, once again, they lived there from around 1955, but then it seemed like that they moved out in 1963 to go a little further east within the plateau. It was apparently around Laval Street, according to Aunt Sonia. So I'm just going to try to figure out where that is exactly. Maybe jog up some memories. Probably mentioned this a few times on my channel before, but I'm just going to say it again. I love the architecture around here. If I was to wager a guess or make an educated assumption, I'm guessing a lot of these are built like maybe towards the late 19th century, early 20th century. That's like around when the middle of Montreal had really started to expand and get pretty large. It's a design that you don't really see much of these days, but it takes a lot to preserve it, honestly, because let's face it, this is all like intricate stonework, a lot of intricate design on the roofing. When it's nice, like when it's preserved, it's really nice. But if it's run down, it goes beyond rustic. But anyways, I'm around here like Laval Street and Napoleon Street, and this is around where my dad's third apartment was. So they live like around this general area again. Yeah, they stuck around the plateau quite a bit. And they stayed like maybe around here until I think it was 1970 when they eventually moved to Saint-Leonard. Yeah, this is a photo that I've seen within my family's collection from time to time, and it's give me a good reason to look at it again. My dad is a little kid with my Dida, which is Ukrainian for grandfather. It's hard to imagine this because I always imagine my dad with his mustache, so it always feels weird to go back and see this with him clean shaven as a kid, or even some of his teenage photos I'm sure they're still around. And my Dida, a full head of hair. I only knew him when he had his glasses, and he had like the usual pattern baldness you see with these people when you get to a certain age. Although I only noticed this little detail over here recently. It's like if I was to look carefully here, you could clearly see the photographer actually in the mirror in the background too. What a crazy little detail. So yeah, Dida in Ukrainian means grandfather, and if you want to say grandmother, it means baba. Yeah, very funny. I wouldn't look very good in a babushka. So if you made your way south of the Lachine Canal, like the Lachine Canal is probably where Griffintown, Saint-Henri, Little Burgundy are all located, then right across there to get into Point St. Charles. So when the settlement was first set up around, I think 1660s, like, you know, when Montreal was first formed, it was mostly agricultural, but over time it seemed to become a lot more industrial, what with the development of the Grand Trunk Railway, which eventually morphed into Canadian National Railway, with the construction of the Victoria Bridge, the oldest bridge in Montreal, and etc. So it was definitely like a working class settlement back in the day, and yeah, quite a bit to see over here. Now, I've actually been around here without even realizing I was in Point St. Charles. I always thought it was like Griffintown, but the Costco is right by the railroads, the recycling factory where the logo kind of looks like it's a record player with some kind of a needle on it, and railway tracks and other stuff. This is Point St. Charles. Funny. Yeah, it's giving me flashbacks too to when I did a walk around Griffintown right by the canal too. But I'm not here to talk about that today. Something else that's actually a pretty interesting fact is this area here is also considered the cultural heritage, or like the central heritage of Irish Montreal. Because one way to know is that I was walking along St. Patrick's Street just now. You're going to find Dublin Street, Rue des Irlandais, like Irish Street, and etc. Which actually feels pretty appropriate considering I am recording this segment of my vlog on the St. Patrick's Day weekend. So yeah, I'm going into Irish Central on an Irish holiday. But it's not just for that. It's actually, in the past, there was like settlements for Polish communities, Ukrainian community, and etc. And I'm in the area where my grandparents had settled into Montreal when they first came over here. Now, something I've been hearing about lately is that on my mom's side of the family, it seems that my grandmother's history has a lot of mystery to it. Like there's a lot of stuff that's pretty hidden that we're trying to uncover. We already know the gist of it. She grew up in Poland, was in Germany and in Russia during the war, and then eventually escaped to Canada. But I feel like there's a lot of details that we're trying to uncover. But compared to that, my dad's side of the family actually apparently is a lot better documented too. And that's kind of why I was able to piece it together to come around here. So, from what I've been hearing, both my grandparents were from the western side of Ukraine. I only know a handful of cities in Ukraine. There's Kyiv, which is the capital of Ukraine, and if you're thinking cooking, you think chicken Kyiv, despite the fact that it may not have Ukrainian origins. There's also Lviv, which is the birthplace of Lvivsky beer, something I love to have whenever I can find it, and Yalta, a south city within the country that probably has beautiful beaches, so I guess if you want to have some sun and bikinis, then you go around there. But they actually came from different areas. What was it? Yeah, I'm actually consulting my cheat sheet while I'm going along. Let's see, my dad's side. Okay, my Dito was from Cherkiv, from the Ternopil Oblast. Just for fun, Oblast is the Ukrainian word for province. And the Rivne area is where my grandmother was first born. They lived around the west. Apparently she moved to Poland for a little while to work. But then they were both transported to Germany during World War II. Eventually they were able to escape, and yeah. Something I found pretty interesting is that when they were settling, they actually settled within France, which I completely forgot about. And if you want to know what part of France they settled in, it was within the northeast, within a little town that was called Roubaix. At least I think that's what it said. Yep, Roubaix. So they lived around there from like the end of the war up until 1951. 1950 is when my aunt Sonia was born, so she was actually born in France before they came to Canada. And as for why they came to Canada, I guess I had some connections, and then they had some friends who moved there, and just like everyone else, Canada had some opportunities for anyone who wanted to live around there. But there was a funny side story to that. My grandfather My Dita, Baba, and Aunt Sonia ended up in Toronto at first, but the issue there was that they didn't speak any English at the time. Because they were in France, they only knew French. So one of his friends had told him that, hey, you should probably come to Montreal. And then he ended up here within Point St. Charles. He eventually did learn English, but it just goes to show that sometimes you have one idea, but then you got to do something else. Oh wait, familiar territory. Well, the Northern Electric Company. This is where my aunt had told me they had lived when they first moved to Montreal. Like, I'm actually on Richardson Street, right in front of here. It's a pretty short street, relatively speaking, but it seemed like it's a lot of older residential buildings. Some of them look like they were built more recently, but just around here is the first apartment that they had when they moved into Montreal. They were living over here at the time when my dad was born, but then he was only here for like maybe, I would say 1 year. Then they moved over to the Plateau. Like I said in the last video, the Plateau just worked logistically for me to film that before I got here, but figured if I got here, I might as well explain how they came to Canada. And like I said earlier in the video, there was a bit of a Ukrainian, Polish, Irish community around here, but this was more like the early 20th century before it really started to pick up. I'm actually going to be right in front of one of those spots that shows you why. That right over there is the Holy Ghost Ukrainian parish within Point St. Charles. So this is one way that you would know that there was a Ukrainian community back in the day over here, because it always depended on where the church was located. I think early 20th century, I've heard there were like 3 churches for them. This one, there was one around Hochelaga Maisonneuve, and another one that was located around Villemot. Villemot is not a place I'm that familiar with. I know one of my closest friends was born over there before she moved over to the South Shore. So maybe one of these days with her help, I can cover a little bit about that. So yeah, this is one telltale sign that there was a community, like I said. Amazing. And they got some of the neat architecture here. Although, I'm not sure what the artwork looks like inside. I wonder if it's going to be as elaborate as the one at my church. So yeah, this is a little bit of my territory. I think I need to go sit down and get myself a quick drink, because I do need to refuel a little bit. And I think I have an idea where I'm going to go. Well, what can I say? If I'm going to be doing a wandering around Montreal, there's no way that I couldn't hit up a bar to try to discover something brand new. And I do have one that was actually pretty close to my dad's old apartment when he used to live here. It's called the Memento Microbrewery. It's located on St. Patrick's Street, just a little south of the Lachine Canal. Now, obviously, if this place is going to be open in the summertime, you're going to have a really nice terrace outside just by the canal. Very similar to the Saint-Ambroise Brewer. I've seen it a couple of times. Like, it came up on my Facebook feed, like says so-and-so likes this bar. So I guess it's trying to tell me, hey, you got to check it out. It's funny how Facebook is trying to track these things. Almost like somehow I remember years ago that they were telling me I should probably get some dandruff shampoo, or I'm getting ads for date divorced Catholic cougars in your region. I really wish I knew what I put down to trigger those kind of ads. But this gave me a good opportunity because I wanted to have one beer before I head on elsewhere, and I wanted to go for a good one, and it's an appropriate one too. This is a New England IPA, my favorite style if you've been following me for a while, and it's called Le Sud-Ouest. Yep, Le Sud-Ouest. I guess it's a play on the fact that I am technically located within the southwest portion of Montreal. So it's a New England IPA, like I said, and it's supposed to be very juicy. You got peach, tropical fruit, hops, and it's actually a collaboration between the brewer over here along with Boreal. So I guess it's kind of a mix of their style New England IPA with the Boreal IPA du Nord-Est, which you already know. It's one of my favorite beers of all time. So cheers. Happy weekend, happy spring, which is almost around the corner, and also happy St. Paddy's Day. Very delicious. So it's one of those that's going to be kind of bitter, but it has the tropical fruit to kind of offset the bitterness if you're not too much into that. And you know, I'm thinking about this too. If my dad were still here and he was looking at all the microbreweries that have been coming out in the last decade, I'm not sure if he would be intrigued to try them out, or if he'd be looking at them thinking like, what is this shit? Because I've talked to friends before where their parents are in a similar age range as my parents were. Some of them have the very same outlook on that. So in terms of my dad's style of beer, all you have to know is that growing up, I always used to see Molson X, Molson Canadian, O'Keefe, Old Milwaukee, I think even Miller Wildcat, which I don't think exists anymore, or like Laurent Cid. So, you know, it was that style of beer from the time that he really liked. So that's kind of why I have a bit of a fondness for a few of them on occasion, especially Labatt 50, because that was always his style of beer. And if you look back, everyone's going to say like, that's like old man beer, or almost tastes very skunky. And if you're not really into beers, you would probably think, what exactly does skunky tasting mean? It's a thing, but I actually had to look that up before I came over here. So apparently skunky is just a way that UV rays apparently affects the beers or the hops. It makes it a little bit more bitter, which I didn't even realize was a thing. And a way to kind of offset that is, it only really happens with bottles. You would use brown bottles apparently to reduce it. Green bottles would be like reduce it a little bit, but clear bottles, those are really bad for getting UV rays to hit that and cause a skunky taste. This is like if you want to avoid it, because skunky means you've done something wrong with your beer. But in terms of the skunky style, like the old style beer, I'm gonna have to look that up again. Hey, the more you know. Some nice decor that's around here, and one thing that did catch my eyes just in back of me is this neon sign that says, "This must be the place," which I guess whoever came up with that was a Talking Heads fan, and I'm good down with that because that's actually one of my favorite songs of theirs. I've used it a few times on the channel, so I may revisit it once more. Something else that catches my eye too is just the fact that I have this neon glowing light that's built right into the countertop, which is actually pretty amazing. But something else I've seen is the chandeliers, the sofas. A lot of it looks like it's antique or like old style furniture. Given the fact I'm doing this whole episode about my dad and grandparents that came here, it does feel kind of appropriate because it does look like the style that they would have had, like something very vintage. Yeah, it's actually amazing to think about here. Craft brewer, located like less than, I would say, a 10-minute walk away from my dad's first apartment when he was in Montreal and when he was born. So kind of incredible. But yeah, once again, I'm thinking it made sense that they moved over here after coming to Toronto because there was a Ukrainian community here. And, you know, you stick with what you know and the language that you knew, especially because at the time, like I said, my grandfather, grandmother did not speak English whatsoever. But when they moved here, they eventually learned it. It just goes to show that after dealing with a world war, you're going to work hard, you're going to do what you can to find a better life for you and for your kids down the road. It's just what it is. Because that's what happened. They learned Ukrainian, they knew German and Russian, I think for obvious reasons, which I don't want to get into. English, French, and I think even my grandfather worked with some Italians, and then he picked up some Italian words down the road. So that means you know, you pick up a lot of that stuff. You work hard to get yourself a good life. Now, like I said, there was a Ukrainian community here, but because of all the influx of new arrivals during the 1950s, that means that anyone who wanted to have a larger community or a larger church, they needed to have something kind of bigger. And that's kind of where the whole move from Point St. Charles up into Rosemont had happened. And that's where those churches I've highlighted a number of times on the channel were built. Like 1950s, 60s, I would say, because the community was really growing and really populating around there. So that's what kind of leads to the next chapter of this. Once I get to their next apartment in Saint-Leonard. So while visiting those neighborhoods was kind of fun to try to retrace those steps, obviously because I wasn't born at that time, I would not have known about those areas. My memory would pick up like around the St. Leonard house that they lived in. Like I said in the previous videos, my dad, Aunt Sonia, and Dito and Baba had moved to St. Leonard in 1970, and that was the last apartment that they lived in before my Dito passed away. But it kind of takes me back to familiar territory over here because I am around Rosemont near the Ukrainian community that I had mentioned. In the 1950s, when the community had really built up, they needed another church, so the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary and St. Sophie's Orthodox Church were the two main ones over here, and they're really elaborate. So every time I come here, it just brings me back to childhood. And once again, I've covered Rosemont a lot on my channel, so I don't have to review it again. But, you know, if you ever want to, there's going to be a link on the top right corner for you to click. You can check out one of my very first wanders, almost like 2 years ago when I started to revisit Montreal again during the pandemic and try to recount some stories and talk about places I'm pretty familiar with. 10th Avenue is another spot that I'm very familiar with within here, mostly because this is where my babcia, babcia is Polish for grandmother, so that's my mom's side of the family. My babcia used to live over here, and we would sometimes come around here on weekends at the same time as visiting my Dito and Baba as well. You know, go to Rosemount, visit one grandparent, and then go to the other one to visit them too. As a matter of fact, I'm coming back to something familiar. Yep, looks the same as it was before. Probably a little bit of work that was done. This was my babcia's triplex that she had owned ages and ages ago that we used to visit from time to time. And funny enough, with the family history, one of those plots over there, like one of the areas that was rented out, was rented out to my parents when they first got married. So it's like they rented from her the cheap rate before they were able to find a cheaper house like around the South Shore. But we used to make so many visits up here too, and I always remember the route. Get onto the Jacques Cartier Bridge, go up Delorme Avenue, then turn right on Bellechasse Street, right when it was actually a two-way street, as opposed to now, which is a one-way street going westward. So I always take that route and then go down Papineau to get back onto the bridge when we were going home. And of course, the soundtrack was going to be a lot of old music. I remember the Jive Bunny mix was one of those things that was played. I don't know if that was something my dad would have played or if that was something my mom was more into. There was a lot of old stuff. Oldies 990 AM was one of those stations, and even Q92, just 92.5 back in the day, was something that we played a lot. I'm kind of thinking that maybe that's the reason I like a lot of old music. I just embraced it over time.
Give me a ticket for an aeroplane. Ain't got time to take a fast train. Lonely days are gone, I'm a-going home. My baby just wrote me a letter. I don't care how much money I gotta spend. Got to get back to my baby again. Lonely days are gone, I'm a-going home. My baby just wrote me a letter. When she wrote me a letter, said she couldn't live without me no more. Listen, mister, can't you see I got to get back to my
So in addition to some of the oldies I would hear on the radio, I think I learned later on that my dad was actually into a lot of the hard rock from the 1970s of the time. Based on what I've heard, he was a Black Sabbath fan, and I do recall seeing in the collection down of the old file that my parents had, besides something that was called Divorce Ukrainian Style, which I'm almost certain was a comedy album, and some Ukrainian folk and polka music, some George Carlin. There was also the copy of Deep Purple and Rock that kind of looks like it's Mount Rushmore, except it's all the guys in Deep Purple at the time, along with an Alice Cooper 45. The single of the song School's Out, that one actually played quite a bit. It's kind of funny though to think about that. He was into a lot of that at the time, but I only really got into that music too, thanks to my buddy Tito, who was getting me into Led Zeppelin, Jimi Hendrix, and a lot of the classic rock. So somehow I kind of followed my dad's footsteps musically. Pretty interesting. So just north of me is Le Boulevard. We always used to call that the P9 Shopping Center, just along P9 Street. And also, if I would go a little further north, it would be along Jean Talon Street. But that could be something I could explore one day further on the channel. I'm actually on Bélanger Street East. And the reason being is that whenever we would be visiting our grandparents here, this is where my dad and me would be driving to go around. And his taste in cars, well, if you think like someone who was born in the 1950s, you kind of know what to expect. He really liked the Cadillac Fleetwood, the Pontiac Granville, or the Bonneville, depending on what year you bought it in. And the only memory I have is of a Chevrolet Caprice that he used to own. It was like a two-door. It was actually pretty roomy and cozy at the time. Although given the fact that cars evolved nowadays, it's some features like not having a shoulder strap on a seatbelt, you cannot get away with these days. Looking back, I'm surprised that was actually even a thing. Of course, those kind of cars are not found as much anymore, mostly because, well, think about it. It's a V8 engine. Those things are gas guzzlers built like yachts, so in the day and age you're trying to be more eco-friendly, those are counterproductive. And it's funny too that for a while when I was thinking about getting a car for myself, I really kind of wanted to get that, even though people would tell me that I like old man cars. Whatever. I took after my dad for a while, and just one of those things that made me feel close to him. That still assumes I'll be buying a car, because if I did that, I wouldn't be doing as much walking as I'm doing here. Not to mention all the expenses that come with it. Could I justify all the expenses of that? Oh yeah, I remember this too. This was their house, and I'm kind of getting flashbacks to the scene. Yeah, that painting I was talking about is actually hanging up on their wall over here. What? Okay, January 1988. Okay, so it's like shortly before my brother was born, so that's when it was taking place. So I was like only 3 years old, like barely 3 years old in this photo. Funny enough too, I'm looking here and I could kind of think of the Cantor's Bread logo that was on this thing, because you used to get a lot of rye bread from them. There was a time when Cantor's Bakeries used to be almost everywhere within Montreal, and I kind of remember the old slogan of, you don't have to be Jewish to love Cantor's Bagels, so that always gave me a kick out of it. This day and age in 2023, the only one that I know that's left is the factory that's located somewhere up in the Villeray, north of the Metropolitan. And I know we used to drive up there at times, either with my Dida and my dad, or just my dad alone. Maybe one of these days I should venture up there to see what I could find around there. I could use a good rye bread right now. Yeah. I'll just go bake myself. still making my way eastward, but on this part of Bélanger, I feel like I'm within the part of Rosemont that's called New Rosemont. So the difference between that and then my grandmother's area is, unlike a lot of the housing over around there, or most of central Montreal for that matter, most of those are like stacked row housing and triplexes, duplexes, but once again to New Rosemont, you can actually find some standalone homes over here, so some parts of it does make me feel like it's within the South Shore, like a very quiet suburban area within Montreal. I would wonder how affordable it is, because if price of housing in my area is getting expensive, I dread to think how much it would cost these days. There we are. I have now made my way onto Viau Street. So I just had to go a little further north along Viau, and then eventually I'm going to hit Saint-Leonard. So I'm just a hop and a skip away from my grandparents' old place around here, so I'll be able to revisit that, think about a few memories. Yeah, I haven't been around here in that much long, but here I go failing English again. What I meant to say is that it feels like it's been a long time since I've been here. I think last year I took a random walk just to see where it was located, but this is a pretty good episode that I want to retrace those steps and just revisit some old memories. What I do recall of that place is that they did have like some fancy-ish furniture over there, covered in a lot of plastic. You know, that old style grandparents' house where nobody's supposed to sit on certain furniture, or if they do, it's got to be protected at all costs. And one room that probably had so many sewing machines, lots of knickknacks and furniture gathered up. But we used to come here quite a bit back then. And actually, that video that I dug up that I showed earlier in the episode was originally recorded over here. So it brought me like a blast of the past. I almost forgot about that random sign on the fridge that said Olga's Kitchen. Olga was my Baba's name, just so you know. So that was a kind of a nice throwback. Okay, I seem to be getting very close now. Yep, I can recognize it, that the kitchen from afar. Man, that really takes me back. And it's another photo that I forgot I had, and it was actually something within my mom's stash, and I was trying to rearrange a few things. Yeah, we spent a lot of time over here. So yeah, I'm right actually close to the old apartment. So if you've been around Saint-Leonard or possibly LaSalle, even some parts of Rosemont, this kind of style apartment is pretty common around here. Like a triplex where you have one set of stairs that goes all the way up to the second floor, one house on the main floor, and then another apartment in the basement right by the garage. So that's kind of what they had. So yeah, I said it was an apartment, and basically goes to show that my dad, until my mom and him had bought the house, he only had rental properties. Unlike my mom's parents, who eventually did own their own house, so they were able to do a few DIY jobs. I do remember that my dad was trying to hook up cable one time on an old TV, and he was the only guy, looking back, that I know who would tighten it up using a wrench. When everyone says that if you're doing coaxial cables, you just gotta hand tighten it. And it got to the point where that TV broke, and to get the cable off, we basically had to snip the thing because it was so tight. Yeah. We used to have fun thinking about that. Just like if I was going through my shirt drawer, I find a roll of socks in there, we're all saying, "Mom, Dad's been putting away laundry again." Or if he was helping out with some of the cooking too. Given the fact that we were kids, like for us, having some boiled pasta like macaroni with hot dogs boiled and then sliced up into mini wedges, yeah, that was his style of cooking. Kind of feel like that had he still been around, that I could have probably prepared him some really good meals. So my mom did say that I've become a better cook than her in the last few years. Yeah, another one of these pictures over here. That style of white wine or bubbly wine, I think I remember for family gatherings that they used to buy that a lot here too. But I had to do a double take because I thought, what was the occasion for these pictures? But I saw in the back it's marked January 6, 1988, and then it rang a bell for me. This was back when we used to do both Christmases with both sides of the family, so You do my mom's side of the family, Roman Catholic Christmas, but then Ukrainian Christmas, which follows the Orthodox calendar, was always on January 6th or 7th. 6 for Christmas Eve, 7 for Christmas, and etc. So I used to do that with my dad's side. So it was quite a bit of celebrating, and that doesn't even include if there was any New Year's celebrations too. Kind of thinking back too about some of the other things here. Something here, like one of the buildings kind of rings a bell. Like I'm getting flashbacks of having a red Smurf on one of the signs. Oh yeah, that sign. Yeah. TV repair shop I remember we used to pass by back in the day. I always got an amusement because of the red Smurf on there, and looking back, changing the color on an actual licensed character is a good way to avoid copyright infringement. Then again, try explaining TV repair shops to anybody in this day and age, because nobody repairs them. They just chuck them and then just buy a new one. Yeah, it's about how technology works. And that's not even talking about the old days of renting stuff on VHS. Because I know that these days everyone will pirate, they'll download stuff. But I know back in the day, I know my parents used to rent stuff on VHS, like rent movies, but they would actually have 2 VCRs hooked up together so I could make a recording of it, and then you'd be able to have that again for future viewing. The quality wasn't as good, but you know, it let you revisit some movies. I know it's like some of my mom's comedies, and even my dad had done that with the Star Trek films. I know he had Voyager Home that was copied. He also had Wrath of Khan copied, which still kind of gives me the heebie-jeebies when I think of that scene. Yeah, if you're a Star Trek fan, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, Chuck Norris. I think some Bruce Lee films, Star Trek, especially the old Star Trek series, that's what he was really into. I do have some memories of watching that, but some of that I really only started to explore like later on when I got older. I don't know what he thought of Star Wars, because I do remember I did get into Star Wars later on. Yeah, it was pretty late, and he did know that I got into that. I do feel like I did watch some Star Wars at that point, because I feel like it was one of those cases where we got the very first film and it was on VHS around that time when you could go through those Columbia House deals where you could get 5 cassettes for about a penny each or something like that, before they would jack up the price. Because I do remember that March 21st, 1997, that Friday I was coming home, and I know that I had a whole bunch of Star Wars novels that I was ordering at the time because I was really getting into it as a fan. And I think I did a project on Ukraine where you're supposed to do like a written project on a country of your choice. I got the best grade in my class, and I was definitely looking forward to telling my dad that. Little did I know that in the afternoon, some colleagues of his from work would come and would tell me that he had passed away in an accident at work. So you can imagine the shock that happened when I heard that news. And I had to think back that the night before, we were just over at my elementary school looking at a book fair, so I didn't realize at the time that that was the very last time I would ever speak to him. As much of a shock as it was back then, I don't think I fully understood just how bad it was or how much it hit me until I became an adult. Because I realized years later, looking back, that he passed away before I was even becoming a teenager or even was growing up to be a young adult. There was a lot of stuff I probably missed out on with him too. Like, we could have talked shop about railroading since eventually both of us had worked in the industry at some point. We could have talked about cars. Definitely would have been able to exchange stuff about music. Maybe I would have got into Deep Purple much earlier if he was around for that. Or barbecuing together on charcoal, because I think that's how I got my love of barbecuing. He was a classic steak and a fries guy, but I think he liked having T-bone with a classic Montreal style steak spice, and I do a bavette these days, so maybe it would have had a debate of which was the better steak. That's one of those things that'll always be a what if. Let's bring up another thought too. we all get to adulthood, we all experience loss, but it all hits us like very differently at times. Like, one thing I could say, like, if you have a relative who's dealing with illness or something or other, at least it's painful and not exactly easy to watch, but you get to make your peace with them and you get to say goodbye. Something like what's happened to my dad, I never got that kind of closure. It just hit me. And then the same thing happened to me with my mom last year too. Both my parents taken away too soon. But I think I could just take solace in the fact that I have to look at the bright side of things. My mom managed to raise 3 kids on her own without our dad around, which is not an easy job to do. We all turned out to be good people, all things considered. We got good head on our shoulders, good jobs, good outlooks on life, and we know how to take care of ourselves. And all we can really do is treasure the past and think 26 years later, we've done them well. We've done both of them proud. I've got good taste in beer. I like to do a good craft beer, but still go for the Labatt 50 to tribute him. I got good skills. I'm more comfortable with a circular saw than he probably was. And I always have warm feelings whenever I go back to some of these areas. And it was kind of nice to be able to revisit some of those parts, like the Plateau, but put in a new perspective knowing that my dad had grown up around there. And we can just use this as a little tribute to family member, friend, and if you've never met him, a good man who was gone way too soon. And then this is going to be the end of this edition of the Wandering Ukie Cheese Café. So if you like what you see, click that subscribe button below and give me a thumbs up if you enjoy the stories, the memories, and everything else. And if you have ideas for future episodes, leave it in the comments section. I'll see what I could do. Till then, take care everyone, and happy St. Paddy's Day.